as a writer, it's a really unique opportunity because you can watch people's reaction. Most of the time, you can't see their reaction when your story's being told. Here's a difference where you can hear the laughter, you can hear the, or you can, whatever it is, you can see it and hear it. And that's pretty unique. So I can't imagine a writer wouldn't want that. You just may have to go through some extra effort to make sure that you do your best job in presenting your best work.
Hello, fellow creative voyagers. This week on the Indy Author podcast, I talk with Gary Zenker about connecting and captivating with author readings, including how readings help create a personal connection with readers, practical tips for preparing and delivering effective readings, finding or creating reading opportunities, and ensuring that your material aligns with the theme, venue, and audience. And now let's hear from Gary Zenker about connecting and captivating with author readings. Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Gary Zenker. Hey, Gary, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. And to give our listeners a little bit of background on you, Gary Zenker is the author of cross-genre flash fiction, and his stories have been selected for print anthologies, including Chicken Soup for the Soul, Laughter, and online collections. He has founded 2 writers groups in southeastern Pennsylvania, which I myself have benefited from, to help writers develop their skills and achieve their writing goals. And he is also the creator of Writers Bloxx, a storytelling game. And Gary joined me back in episode 162 to talk about book marketing lessons from beyond the book world, which was a very fun conversation.
Yeah.
And more recently, I started thinking about the fact that I wanted to talk with somebody about author readings. And I thought, you know what? I know the perfect person to have that conversation with. And so I called up Gary, and he was kind enough to offer to chat with me. So Gary, you have been the organizer of a number of the author readings that I have had the pleasure of participating in. So I know that you're the perfect expert to talk about this.
It's an important tool to help build your audience and build your platform. So I've arranged a number of different readings, and also even in the writers group on a regular basis, we have people stand up in front of each other and read their pieces.
And why do you think that's important? What are people getting out of that experience?
There's a lot of things. Number one, as a writer, you can control how the piece is read, which you can't do entirely when someone else is reading it. So you get this opportunity to do something that you can also see their reaction live, right?
Yes.
That's part of what's really good about it. And it helps you build your platform because you're going to build fans out of it, or people who want to see you read, and they're going to attach you to your stories in a way that you can't do if it's just in print.
Yeah, performing it or even having people hear your voice say it, I think is connecting in a way that even words on a page, much as it pains me to say it, even words on a page don't have that same kind of connection potential.
Right.
And I also think that it's a nice way to prepare for other sorts of public events so that, if an indie author publishes, or if an author is accepted by a traditional publisher and now they have to get out there and sell their book, they're going to have to be in front of a lot of people in a lot of different venues. And I think that author readings is a really nice opportunity early in a writer's career to have that experience of standing up in front of a group and representing their work, like either representing it by reading it or representing it by describing what it's about, what the themes are, what the characters are like, and so on.
And remember, writers sometimes take on that role of writing because they're not extroverts.
Yeah.
And so in some cases, you have to put on your extrovert mask for just a short period of time, for 5 or 7 minutes, to be able to do that.
Yeah, one of the tips I've heard about attending writers' events, which I think is generalizable also to author readings, is this idea of pretending you're someone else.
Right.
And so pretending you're the author who feels comfortable with author readings. It sounds kind of silly, but I think that if you just say, I'm playing a part tonight, the part I'm playing is an author who really enjoys talking about their work in front of an audience of receptive listeners, I think that could kind of help get you over the hump. It kind of get over imposter syndrome too.
I can tell you that personally, I'm an introvert, but I cover it up by being an extrovert, right?
Yeah.
And part of it is having a role. I'm very comfortable when I have a role. If my role is to read, if my role is to be in the spotlight for 7 minutes, I'm very comfortable with that. So I'm sure it works for other people the same way.
Yeah, I like that idea of recognizing that maybe you're playing a role if this is not something that comes to you naturally. Yeah. So let's assume we've convinced people of the benefits of having this experience of reading one's work in front of an audience. So how would you recommend people find the opportunities that are right for them? Because I think maybe every opportunity isn't right for every different kind of writer.
I think that's right. Finding the opportunities, number one, it's always about networking with other writers. They'll be very open because they're not competing with you generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Readings are going to have 5, 7, 10 people, 20 people at an open mic night, for example. So I think that writers groups are a good way, and partially because I run a writers group, but I think that's a good way to stay connected and get those opportunities. Sometimes I drive by, I live in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and I drive by and I see a sign. I have yet to go in there, but they say Tuesday night open mic. Now, maybe they mean just guitar players or singers, but I'm going to bet that I could go in there and they go, oh, yeah, we'd let you read for 5 minutes or 6 minutes, especially if I'm engaging during that reading, right? After the first time. Some of my writers group members have done the same thing. It wasn't meant to be necessarily a reading, but open mic night provides an opportunity. And almost every open mic night I've ever been to lets everyone in there. Libraries are a really good place. We have a local library, the Phoenixville Library, that does it twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
And just staying connected with everyone and asking them, what do you know? And sharing it back, right? Because that's the other piece of it is you don't just want to take, you want to give back and help other people understand where their opportunities might be.
Yeah, I think that another consideration for tailoring the opportunities one pursues that are appropriate for you would be thinking about things like the venue and the expectations that are being set. Like if you're participating in a reading in a city bar at 10 p.m., there are different things you can read than if you're participating in a library at 10 a.m. on a weekend. And so if you're writing like more edgy stuff, more explicit stuff, more violent stuff, things that have like more profanity in it, then tailor the opportunities you're pursuing to the audience that you're likely to draw in that venue.
Or do a light edit.
Yeah.
You can always clean things up a little bit to make them more or less suited for the audience, right?
Yeah, for mine, I definitely have the PG-rated words and the R-rated words. Like I might have written the R-rated word, but I'll say the PG-rated word if I'm in a library on a weekend.
I remember one week of a guy, he must have used the F word like 70 times. It was unbelievable how many times he used it. I just went, oh, I'm really glad we're in a private restaurant. That was sealed off. The room was sealed off. I went, yeah, I think I would tell him if you ever go to the library, don't read that piece.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk a little bit about that in terms of the prepping yourself conversation that we had talked about having. But I think that the other thing you had talked about networking earlier and the importance of community building. And I'm thinking back to a reading I attended as an attendee at a brewery in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, where I was going to be giving a reading. And I thought, oh, I'll go and watch, someone else do it. And the person was a poet. And I thought, the snob that I am, I thought, oh, how many people are going to show up? The place was packed. And you could tell that it was packed because he had a lot of friends there. And he had obviously let his friends know he was going to be talking. And the friends were super excited to have him there. It was a very receptive, enthusiastic group of people who were buying a lot of beer. And so they were making the owners happy. And I think that idea of you can't really expect, and this is so generalizable to so many aspects of a writer's life, you can't expect to just put up some posts on social media and then rely on the sponsoring organization to put up some posts on social media and then show up and have an audience. You really have to pave the way for that by being an active member of your community and then letting that community know when these kinds of events come up.
I think that's absolutely true. What right do we have to expect that someone else will fill a room for us if we're not willing to make that effort and encourage our friends and family and everyone else to show up?
Yeah. And I think that was also a good example of whether he was doing it intentionally or unintentionally, he was accommodating the desires of the hosting organization, a brew pub, which was, they really want to bring people in to buy a lot of beer.
Right.
And so, whatever he did, it wasn't necessarily a crowd that was going to be buying a lot of books or, other things that other venues might be hoping for. What they wanted was a big, enthusiastic, happy crowd to buy a lot of beer, which is exactly what happened. And so, if you tap into that crew and then you want to go do a talk at a library and you bring in a lot of people who are looking to have a good time and buy a lot of beer, you're not going to get the same effect that you were really searching for. So understanding the goal of the venue.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. In order to get that privilege of being and have that place, you have to understand what their goal is.
Yeah. So I think this is somewhere where pursuing these kinds of opportunities is sort of different than pursuing other opportunities. So I think of things like, I don't know, being in an anthology or something like that, which obviously you have experience with. It feels a little bit different. Well, I don't know. I'm saying this, but I'm about to contradict myself, which is that tapping into the community is really key. And I think that writers groups are probably the most obvious and the most easy way that writers can find opportunities to give readings. Are there other, do you have anything to say about that? And are there other venues that people should be looking at in order to find those opportunities?
So the good news about writers groups is they have lots of members who have lives outside the group, and they can bring information to the group.
Mm-hmm.
It's not automatic. Not every writers group is going to automatically filter those to you. You may have to network and ask people specifically to bring that up on a monthly basis or weekly basis, however long. As I said, I think libraries are really good. Looking at schools, because they may have some open opportunities to read. Bookstores, really, it's pretty expansive. And then when still else fails, set up your own. And I have some experience with doing that. The bar that we do annually, we used to do 3 times a year. And after COVID, it became a once-a-year event to benefit the Oxford Public Library. That started because I had a friend, Tony Conaway, who was kind of shut out of reading his pieces. And because he hadn't had a lot published, he had a lot of business pieces published, but he didn't have things that would qualify for that. And I kind of said, well, then we'll create our own. And he was really the origin behind Laura DeBar happening frequently, right? And he was a wonderful writer. He deserved to have his stories told in public. And as the writers group, it was easy to leverage that and say, we're going to shine a spotlight on different local writers. So you can, in the end, create your own if you find out it isn't happening where you want it to happen, or go to a library or go someplace and offer to help them set it up. Again, sometimes you can't expect just to be invited. Sometimes you have to be part of the mechanism that puts it together.
Yeah, let's hold a conversation for hosting one till the end. That would be a great wrap up once we've talked about all these other considerations. And I think it's funny because I can go back to episode 9. Episode 9 of the Indy Author podcast was The Craft and Business of Short Fiction with Tony Conaway. So if people want a little fix of Tony Conaway there, they can go back to episode 9 to find that, because short fiction and the readings of short fiction were definitely Tony's areas of expertise.
Right.
So one of the areas we wanted to talk about was prepping yourself. When you're thinking about prepping yourself for a reading, what do you have in mind? What advice would you give?
So there's 2 pieces, right? There's prepping the story itself and then prepping yourself for the reading. When we talk about prepping the story, the most important thing is reading it out loud. When you read something out loud, you end up auto-correcting things. Either they're very hard to say, right? Because you've used too many consonants in a row or something, or you left out words and you end up adding them because of your natural rhythm working. Your mind is working faster than your eyes are working on the reading. The other part that's really important is reading a piece is not the same, and you know this, is not the same as reading it from paper. Because on paper, we have paragraphs. We can see paragraphs change, and we can see where the dialogue changes from one person to another just from the change of paragraph. You can't see that when someone's reading. So the first thing I say is read it out loud, because you may need to add dialogue tags. More he said, she said, something like that, to indicate whose voice is the words are being spoken in. I also talk about timing the reading as someone who has hosted these things, right? When someone tells you have a 7-minute limit, nothing is more frustrating than someone going 8 or 9 minutes. And the reason why is because whoever's hosting has figured out who to put very carefully, who to put where in the schedule and how long that evening's going to last. If everyone goes 3 minutes over, right, you're adding another, half hour to an hour to the event. And that means that people leave before they see the last person read. That's not fair.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly surprised how many people go to readings, won't name names, and when they have the buzzer, they hear the buzzer in the middle of their reading. It means they didn't prep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that my theory is that people read something to themselves and they say, oh, that feels like about 5 minutes. And you cannot tell until you read it out loud and time yourself. And I just feel like there is no excuse.
There isn't.
Maven about this. There's no excuse for people going in. And I can understand if people are a little bit over because maybe they're reading more slowly, maybe they stumble a little bit, or if they're reading a little faster than I expected. But this thing where people go minutes over, there is no excuse. If you have read it out loud and timed it when you did that, there was no excuse for going over.
And the other piece to that is people read too fast.
Yeah.
And it ruins the cadence of the sentences and the beauty of the structure. I remember being at the library and hearing one guy read poetry, 5-minute limit. They give you this obnoxious buzzer to let you know you're at 5 minutes, right? And I went up to him afterwards. I said, can I see what you read? And he showed it to me. And he had read like 5 poems. And I read it. And I said, you need to slow down. This is beautiful, but we didn't get the beauty from you reading it because you were trying to finish all 5 poems. You should have read 3. And I wasn't meaning to be critical. I was meaning to help him the next time because it deserved better than what it got in that reading.
Yeah, absolutely. I very rarely have experienced someone who's reading too slowly. I've never experienced someone who's reading too slowly. And I was similarly at a library reading years ago, and someone was clearly trying to fit like 8 minutes of material into a 4-minute slot. And I was like, you know what? The better idea is take 4 minutes of material because you're reading it because you want people to appreciate it. Yet, like you want them to understand the quality of the material, not the quantity of the material. And someone who's giving the audience time to think about what they've heard is going to make a much better impression than, that person really said a lot of words in the time they had allocated to them.
Right. So I agree. People need to read it. They need to slow down when they read it and actually read it either in front of people or in front of a mirror out loud and time it and then go back and edit your piece.
Yeah.
If it's too long and you want to read that piece, it's time to be an editor and go back in there and do what you need to do to make it a piece that's worthy, that when you end, you're satisfied with where it ends. And your audience is going to be satisfied with where it ends.
Yeah. I remember being at a reading where, let's say the time limit was 5 minutes, and I obsessive compulsively sort of mentally, like even if I'm not looking at a clock, I'm mentally in my head gauging how far the reader is through it. And so they were coming up to 5 minutes, it seemed clear. And they said a sentence. I was like, oh, that is a great place to end. That is, oh no, they're still talking. And they did like that like 3 times. And I think it was because they probably had a scene or chapter they were trying to get in. And in their mind, it was a unit that they wanted to share. But I think that the huge benefit of sharing this with someone else is if you say it to someone and they say, that's a perfect place to end. It's like having a beta reader. It's like having a beta listener. People are going to pick those moments. And in that case, it might not be a matter of, now I have to edit, like make these tweaky edits in order to make it in the time. It's like, no, you're at 4 minutes and 30 seconds and you just said the perfect closing line. Like, just stop there. You don't have to do any editing. And I think that's something that sometimes other people can see that the author, the reader is not going to see themselves.
I totally agree. And that's funny, right? Because we're so invested in our entire story. We don't want to stop there, but the audience or someone is telling you that's the perfect stop.
And if you stop it at that moment where they're intrigued, but they're not quite satisfied, perhaps you're more likely to sell a book. because they're going to say
Right.
like, oh, I'm so intrigued. Now I have to find out what happens. I'm going to buy the book. I'm going to, buy it at the back of the room, or I'm going to go on to bookshop.org and buy it, or whatever that might be.
Right. Right. The other thing is, and really, really important when you're prepping your stories, prep 2 more stories the same way. Tony Conaway taught me this, and he was so right. Because in the end, you don't know who you're going to follow and what their story is. And maybe they just read 2 vampire stories.
Oh.
And here's stories of vampire story. And you go, oh, this is not going to have the impact it had if I were the first reader or the first 2 stories were something else. And he taught me that always have 3 stories in your bag and practiced and the same process so that you can pull them out and spontaneously say, it could be that the audience, you just realize what they react to. They're all older. They're all female. They're all something, or they have some trait in common that makes you say, this isn't the best story to read here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a pro tip.
So, and of all the things we're going to talk about, that's one of the most important things. Prep you well.
Yeah.
So then there are things you should do to prepare your reading that are a little bit different. One of them is, and I see this all the time. Again, I kind of wring my hands when I see this. Go, oh, I wish I could have talked to you beforehand and told you don't do this. Don't read from a book. A book is awkward. You're going to have to hold it with 2 pages if there's no podium because you don't know what you're going to walk into. It's hard to turn the pages. Always have printed out paper. And the other part is when you print out at least 2 copies. Put them in different places when you go because one of them may get lost for some reason and you have a second copy. And personally, I also bring a copy on a USB drive because if I forget both of my copies, and believe me, I've done this, you might be able to find someone who can print it out for you quickly. And I know that sounds very paranoid and maybe, but that's who I am. I like to be over-prepared for things.
Yes.
I also email a copy to myself, right? Because if I can't get to the USB drive, sometimes I can send it to someone in the restaurant who has a printer from my email and they'll print it out for me. And I've had that happen as well. So we either think I'm really well prepared or I'm really sloppy in remembering what to bring. But in either case, I'm ready to read.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose that in the worst case, you could, if you had emailed it and you have cell reception, you can read it from your phone. Although I think that would be the last resort because I think people reading from a phone is just fraught with peril. Like people scroll to further, they flick their thumb further than they think, and now they've scrolled too far and they have to go find their place again, or they don't have cell reception or something like that. So I think it's very tempting to have, your iPad or your phone or something like that and have it on there. But I've seen too many people fumble with the technology and have that be distracting from the experience.
And I agree, even if it works, right? If they scroll too fast or too slow or whatever, that causes problems. So I never recommend read from anything except paper. And again, if you use heavier than 20-pound paper, it's much easier. It doesn't make as much noise. When you're flipping the pages, you can get rid of them. It doesn't interfere with the microphone. So I always print on thick paper.
Yeah.
And again, do it for 2 other pieces. Don't just do it for 1. Have 2 extra pieces in your bag the same way. And then when you're preparing for this, think about, okay, I should do social media and I should announce that I'm going to be there. There's nothing wrong with announcing the other people who are going to be with you in your social media, right?
Yeah.
For lots of reasons. 1, it may attract more people than would come just for you. And 2, if you do it, maybe someone else is going to do it for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that also making sure you flag people on social media so that they see you're doing that and then they could share that post or whatever is always a best practice.
There's another trick that I learned, and that is that if you're doing something that has a lot of dialogue, if you're doing voices, some people actually change their voice a little bit. You can color code the dialogue to be consistent so that you're not confused and have to read he, she and ahead of time, but you know that the red is female and the blue is male or whatever colors you have to choose. And that can also help you if you're using that as a technique in your reading.
Yeah, I think that sort of harking back to what we were saying earlier about people reading too quickly is another benefit. I recommend that people record themselves doing a reading, and that has two benefits. One is that if you listen to the recording a couple of times, you kind of start memorizing it so you don't have to look at the page so much. But the other thing is, I think that almost always we think we're reading slower than we really are. So it's proof that we need to slow down. And we think we're being more dramatic than we really are. And so we can learn from listening to the recording that we can be more dramatic. Like, I remember listening to recordings of myself reading a passage of dialogue and thinking I was being like pretty expressive about the dialogue. But when I listened to it, it sounded very monotone. And I really had to do something that sounded to me very extreme in order to make it sound good, for the listeners. And if you can do that, like if you have two people talking and you can convince yourself to render their voices in different ways, then sometimes you can avoid those he said, she said dialogue tags if it's clear for the listeners based on your voice who's speaking in that line of dialogue.
So along those lines, if you're able to do that, you need the indications on the paper that help you do that. The different color for dialogue is one way to do that. Bolding certain words helps remind you to emphasize them while you're talking, right? And it happens fast. Underline is poor. Bold is really, really good because it's obvious. One technique, I had a boss who went to Catholic school, and he was taught to put slashes where you want to put spaces or breaths. Now, a comma is one way to do that, but commas in unnatural places will kind of mess up your rhythm.
Yeah.
But if you put slashes between the words, or double slashes if you need to pause a little longer, or ellipses, right? Then as you're going along, you recognize very, very quickly where to take those breaths or where to stop for a second. So that was also a very, very useful hint for people who are reading, and putting it a little larger than normal, because when you get to the reading place, which is the next thing, ahead of time, you don't know what kind of light they have. You don't know their sound system. You don't know if there's a podium there, which is the reason why I say never read from a book, always have paper. So you need to prepare yourself for the worst case scenario, which might mean that the light didn't work, the podium didn't show up, all the things that could go wrong that person who's running it can't control.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that one suggestion I'll add is that I have very unsteady hands. And so me standing in front of a group of people holding a piece of paper without a podium is a disaster. And so I ended up getting basically a music stand, an adjustable music stand. And so if I were to show up somewhere for a reading and there was no podium, I could, at a minimum, carry music stand up with my stuff on it, and I'd be set. And in the best circumstance, I could say to the organizer, hey, I have this music stand, would it be helpful to set it up? And so I never have to worry about, what's going to happen if I don't have somewhere to put my notes? I'm always going to have somewhere to put my notes. And I suppose you could expand that to say, you could get one of those little book lights to attach to your music stand that would illuminate your notes. And so to the extent you can do that without messing up the logistics that the organizer and the venue have available, you don't have to be completely at the mercy of what the venue happens to have on offer.
Imagine that you've got the podium but no light. Well, you can hold your phone there, right? And do it. That's taking up one hand. Don't do the book.
Yeah.
People understand that. Don't do the book because you're not going to be able to handle everything.
Yeah.
There are things you can do makeshift, and that's very kind of you. And yes, that would be the thing you would hope someone would do. You'd hope the organizer has everything needed, but yeah, you could lend your stand to them for the whole thing, and you've solved your problem and everyone else's.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I do is because of my unsteady hands, I never have a glass that has ice in it. Especially if there's a microphone, because I don't want this if I pick up the glass for a drink and the ice cubes are rattling. So, you can just learn those sort of techniques as you gain experience.
But I think if people do those things, they will be better prepared for their reading. They'll get a much better result because they'll have practiced it. They'll know what time it is. They won't be nervous about that. They'll know they have time to read their thing at the speed that they should read it, which makes you calmer, right? And your piece is optimized to be able to be read under multiple circumstances, many of which you can't control.
Yeah, I do think that maybe one of the reasons that more people, or that there's a certain number of people who are just going in and winging it and clearly haven't practiced it, is this feeling that it's going to be more spontaneous. It's going to be more, I don't know what. off the cuff, it's going to be more exciting. And I'm like, really not, because if you want to go to like a Broadway play, you don't expect people to say, I have worked on the staging or the blocking. I'm just going to go out there and kind of wing it. No, you want people who have had the professionalism to actually practice this stuff and rehearse it and think about those kind of details. So yeah, that would be yet another plug for
and for multiple reasons, right? Part of it is because you want to be invited back.
Yeah.
If you're the weakest reader there, you're not going to be invited back. And anyone who saw you is not going to say, oh, I got to have them come to my place and read. And your audience isn't going to get the reaction that you want them to have.
Yeah.
So I agree, spontaneity is great, but having an impactful reading is more important than what you're going to get out of the spontaneity.
Yes. So this is sort of a good lead into a conversation about at the reading. So let's talk about some of the best practices. We've already hit on some of them, but what other advice do you have for people at the reading?
Show up early and check where you're going to read. Check with the lighting. And, we're beating a dead horse, but check what the lighting is and make sure that's going to be okay for you. You can do something about it beforehand. You can't after.
Yeah.
Check the microphone and learn how to adjust that ahead of time. In a lot of cases, we have a lot of height differences between people. Some may be further back from the podium. You want to know how to get that close enough that it's actually working, right? As opposed to being so far away, it's not actually amplifying your voice. I would say, in addition to that, make sure you record yourself in one way or another. Sometimes the event will record you. Sometimes you're going to need someone with a camera and a little stand to record you. And that's not going to give you the best sound, but you should be trying to do it for a couple reasons. You should do it because it's a learning experience. As much as you think it's the same as standing in front of the mirror or in front of your mom or spouse or whomever, it's a different experience when you put all those people there. And sometimes your adrenaline kicks in and the environment's different. So you want to be able to look back at that and use that as a learning experience. You'd also like to use it, if you can, as an asset. And that means something different. If it's not being recorded for you, then you start to look at things like, well, I can buy a lapel mic for $29 and I can attach it to me, and the person recording me can attach the other end to the phone because they're wireless. And that's a cheap investment to get really good sound, really clear sound on a video that you can later put on YouTube or use as an advertisement for whatever you're doing. So I always recommend that people do that. And when I run an event, I record it for them because I know that I want to make sure that they have that. When I did the winery with you, you had someone recording already, which is a great gift. Then the person doesn't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But it's your responsibility to know that. And if you want it, to take care of that. It's also, you don't want distracting movements, right? When you're standing there, you don't want to be swaying, and you want to make sure you're not just looking down and reading the thing. That's the other thing that comes from practice. You want to be able to look up and engage the audience a little bit. It's not great when all you do is sit there and they see your forehead and your eyes looking down, right?
Yeah.
You haven't mastered the art yet. And it's your story of anyone who should be able to look up once in a while and look at the audience and look at their reactions. It should be the person who wrote the story.
Yeah. I think that something that I always try to remember, it's very difficult to remember, but if you've had this practice of recording yourself practicing and listening back to it, then pretty soon, probably even without that, just because you wrote it, you'll remember phrases, you'll remember sentences. And so I think a way to achieve both that connection with the audience and a good pacing is to look down, absorb the sentence or the phrase you're going to say, and then look up and say it, so that you're never reading to the paper. You're reminding yourself on the paper what you need to say next. You look up and you say it, and then you look down again. And I think people feel like that's going to be very slow and tedious, but each time you do that, you're giving the audience a moment to appreciate the words that you're reading. And I don't think it ever feels slow to the audience. Now, I say this as this is like the pro tip that I am still working on, but that's always my goal, to not be reading from the paper, but to be reminding myself of what's on the paper, but reading to the audience.
The other thing is the word I was at a recent reading and I heard someone, and you don't notice it the first one or two, but the 10th line, especially if there's more than one in the sentence, you go, holy cow. It is better not to have anything in that space in silence than the word over and over again. They'll notice the space a little. They'll notice the immediately. So
once you think about it, you can't stop yourself.
Yeah. So the best thing you can do is try not to use as a space holder and use the pause or the silence and force yourself to do that. Again, that goes back to practicing it that way. It goes back to being very conscious when you're reading it, not to do that. And it's a little easier when you're reading. You should be reading the words straight.
Right. It's not like conversation where you're using those words to let your brain catch up with your mouth.
Right.
And I think it is one of those things that if you're very familiar with material and you're doing this, I'm reading the sentence, then I'm saying the sentence, then that would help avoid those ums. And I'm going to throw in one of my pet peeves.
Good.
If we can all get on our soapbox for this. So one of my pet peeves, I'm sure there are like tons of other at the reading things that we could talk about, but I wanted to get to the after the reading. But the one thing I wanted to say about at the reading is that whatever you do, don't apologize or make an excuse for your performance. And so the absolute worst thing you can say, in my opinion, is at the beginning say, well, my reading isn't going to be as good as that last person, or, oh, I'm sorry, I've been so busy, I didn't have a chance to really practice it. That is wrong for so many reasons, not least of which is it's showing unbelievable disrespect to the audience. If you have an audience of 20 people and your reading is 5 minutes, do the math, like you're taking up that many minutes of your audience's time. And if you didn't care enough to rehearse ahead of time, then shame on you. And never set the bar so low. I think people do that. They say like, oh, my reading isn't going to be as good as the last person's because they figure if I set the bar low enough, it won't be that hard to clear it. But it's just like everybody's going to get up and go to the bar and get a drink or check their phone or something like that. No, you don't want to say what you're about to hear is subpar. No, you want to be able to have done the preparation that enables you to go up there with confidence and say, hey, my reading is going to stand up to the best that everybody else in this reading has to offer. So no excuses, no apologies.
Not only that, you put it in people's heads, it's not going to be good. You've already set them up to not think of it well.
Yeah.
And you just shouldn't do that to yourself. You shouldn't do that to the audience, right? That's a very good point.
Yeah. Obviously, we're talking about a topic we both feel very strongly about.
Yeah, we can both, you can think people, you always know people who have done this. The truth is you get better at it by doing it often, which is really important. No one expects you to come out of the gate the first time you do this. There are people who are naturals at it, but most of us, especially because we're writers, we struggle with these skills. This isn't the first skill. Our first skill is writing.
Yeah.
But it's really important that we get better at this each time and help each other through it, right?
Yeah, I think that the nice thing is that you're not up there with competitors, you're up there with colleagues, and you can expect that kind of consideration, which actually is a great entree to our last conversation that we wanted to, the last conversation we wanted to talk about, which was after the reading. So I'm curious about your thoughts regarding after the reading.
I would always say thank the host. Whether you don't have to, you can do that into the mic, but the host has put in so much work into this and is so distracted the entire thing, right? I can tell you this from experience, that it takes very little to thank the host after the meeting, if you will. And I think most people I've ever met have done that. And I try and make it a point every time because it sometimes reminds other people to do it. When you go home, you review the recording. Again, no apologies, just learn from it. I did this well. I didn't do this as well. So next time I might do something different. Or review the reading experience. If someone else is recording it, it's still your story. You want to know what your rights are to the recording. But most of the time, like I'll give you the example for the Fuchsville Public Library, I always download it, chop my little bit out of it, and then post my bit on YouTube. Because the public library has their own, but I'm at the end. And I'm not going to send someone to watch the entire thing to get mine at the end. And it doesn't serve me as having a repository of my videos. So I tend to take mine. The other reason for doing that is because if it's online and that place goes out of business, or they decide not to keep those videos archived, you no longer have it at all accessible. So you really want to keep a copy of that. But while you're there, mix with other people. Ask them what they'll probably tell you what they thought of your reading. I remember, last time I wrote a noir de bar, I was the last one. And I remember one of my fellow writers saying, "You are a sick SOB." And that was, for a noir de bar, that's great. He was telling me the story was very impactful, right? So it's actually on the end of the video. I left it there because I thought that was funny if I left it. But tell the other writers that you like their story. Use this as an opportunity. You've got something in common with 10 or 15 people or whatever that the rest of the group doesn't have. Use it as a moment to bond with them and use it to build a relationship.
Yeah.
With those people, especially if you didn't know them before.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things, this is more about preparing for the reading, but Gary, you were always very accommodating about the fact that I would always ask if I could go early, because my experience always is that until I have finished my reading, I'm not going to be able to pay full attention to the other readers. And so, all things being equal, if I have an opportunity to ask the organizer and ask them if I can go early, then I know that I'm actually going to be paying attention when the other readers are reading. So that's, a tip that people can use. But also, regardless of where you fall in the evenings or the day's program, show it for the first one and stay till the end. Like, none of this, I've done my reading, so now I'm going to leave, because you need to be an active participant in the event as a whole. And that's not only showing respect to your fellow readers, because there's nothing worse than being the last reader and having everybody have left because they're done.
Right.
But you're also benefiting yourself, because who knows what kind of fun conversation you might have at the end of the event or in a break or something like that. Commit yourself for the full event.
I've told you this. Let's tell the whole audience this, that you are always my first invite. When I hold any of my events, right, you're my first invite. There's a very logical reason why. I know you're going to be professional. I know you're going to do a great reading, right, because you know your material. I know that you are going to stay within the time, and I'm not going to have to worry. Everything with you is going to run smoothly. So after the first time, I know that I want you back because I can depend on you. And you're a very good reader. So you become a pillar, right? Weaker readers get put in between strong readers. So to hold up the event by a host so that it runs fairly smoothly. There's nothing worse than putting 3 weak readers in a row, especially if they don't know if they're good or not.
Yeah.
So you put the people you know there. You're always the first invite that I find out, can you come or can you make it in your schedule or whatever.
Yeah.
That is going to hold true, and you're going to end up with a reputation of being reliable. I think the public library puts me last. I'm not bragging, but I think they put me last because he knows I'm going to stay within time. I'm going to do a reading that isn't full of ums and ahs, and he can end the show on me if he wants to. And my name's Zenker, so it could just be Z, right? But I think they pick a lot of them by random, but I think he puts me last for a reason. And I'm proud of that and honored to do that. You earn that by the performance you have, by presenting your material. So, and the point is, you want to be invited back not only to that person holding an event, but anyone else who sees it. You want them to say, I want to hear a different story at a different event. Bring books, right? If you're selling books, ask them ahead of time if you can, but there's generally nothing wrong with bringing books. If you want to give one away, you can. It probably is not going to affect the people who are going to buy your book, giving away one book. And it's just a nice thing. Sometimes what we do is the person gives it to the event. If it's a charity event, they'll give the proceeds of that book, the one book, to the event.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to use that as we'll probably have to hit this quite quickly, But the idea of hosting your own. So let's say you're looking out there, you're not seeing the opportunities in writers groups or at libraries or whatever. So can you just give a couple of tips? Because Gary, I'd like to return the favor and say that when an invite comes in from you, then it goes to the top of my list because you do such a good job of organizing these events. And if you could just share a couple of tips with people if they're thinking about maybe organizing their own a reading event, what advice would you give them?
Part of what's happening is when you invite 10 people to a room, hopefully what you're getting is a somewhat built-in audience because they're going to each talk to people who want to see them read. So you're building 20, 30, 40 people if they bring 2 or 3 people apiece. You want to think about who that audience is likely to be. You have to find a place that's going to be easy, that's going to let you hold it there. Not all places will give you a free room in exchange for food, but that's a pretty good deal for someone holding an event, right? And that's what I look for. Will they let me have the space and let me take over? Will they do any advertising for me in their monthly calendar or whatever? Or the people I'm invited, are they reliable and are they likely to do their own postings on social media? I depend on them because I can't do it all myself. And are they going to stick to the topic? If we have a Noir de Bar focuses on crime and supernatural and maybe some fantasy elements, I need people who are going to stick to the theme and they're going to stick to the time. So I'm thinking about all those things simultaneously when I'm making my short list of people to invite. And then my second list if I don't have enough people. I'm thinking about location. I'm thinking about, am I going to need sound equipment? What else am I going to need to make it successful for both the writers and for the audience? Because in the end, I want them to walk away and say, this was time well spent. And I'm doing it to put writers in the spotlight. So I have to make sure that every time I'm doing it, everything is thinking about how can I do it so I can connect listeners or audience with the writers and put them in a spotlight that they're happy to be there. I guess that kind of answers the question, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that answer. And I think that it's a nice sort of loop back to the idea that we do readings in order to build a community, and we can also use a community to lead to readings. And so it's kind of a nice virtuous cycle between the importance of getting out there and interacting with your fellow writers and your readers, and it can lead to these kinds of nice opportunities.
Yeah. As a writer, it's a really unique opportunity because you can watch people's reaction. Most of the time, you can't see their reaction when your story's being told. Here's a difference where you can hear the laughter, you can hear the, or you can, whatever it is, you can see it and hear it. And that's pretty unique. So I can't imagine a writer wouldn't want that. You just may have to go through some extra effort to make sure that you do your best job in presenting your best work.
Yeah. So great. Well, what a nice line to end on, Gary. And so, you're closing it out just as you said you did with the library event, being the closer there. So thank you so much for a lovely conversation. And please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Gary Zenker Storyteller.com will give you a broad brush on who I am and all the stuff that I do. And that's probably the best place.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Gary. What's your favorite tip for preparing an engaging reading of your work? I would love to hear your thoughts. Just leave a comment on YouTube. And if you got value from this episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Matty a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.